And secondly, ever since that day, and of course many, many times before, his brave Hamas fighters, as he calls them, have been firing rockets indiscriminately at civilian populations inside Israel, and are still doing so. They won't be doing so much longer because they're about to be throttled by the IDF. And not only that, but they've also been firing them from within the civilian population. That is against the laws of armed conflict, and preventing the civilians from leaving the combat areas when the IDF are trying to warn them about attacks, again, against the laws of armed conflict. They've also fired many of their rockets into the Gaza civilian population. We just have to look at the Al-Ali hospital attack that was attributed to the IDF, but turned out to be an Islamic Jihad, another brave Islamic Jihad fighters, firing their own rockets into their own civilian population. Let's not forget what Hamas is all about here. The reason Hamas launched this attack, there are strategic reasons, of course, but the overriding reason they launched this attack on the 7th of October, and the reason they launched all of their attacks, is to force Israel to defend itself from these attacks, which any country and every country would do and has the right and the obligation to do. And in carrying out its reaction to these attacks, Israel, unfortunately, has no choice but to kill innocent civilians in the process, despite the efforts they take, which are enormous, to avoid doing that. But that's what Hamas wants. Hamas, they don't just want civilians to protect their terrorists. They want Israel to kill civilians, so that Israel is then condemned, delegitimized, vilified, isolated around the world. And it works every time in the United Nations, in the universities, in some governments, human rights groups, always condemn Israel. That's what Hamas want, and that encourages Hamas to do it again and again and again. And by Mr. Barghouti, who claims to support peaceful resistance, by Mr. Barghouti justifying what they do, he also has blood on his hands from encouraging Hamas terrorism.
I think you are absolutely biased.
Mr. Barghouti, you're going to get a moment. Mr. Barghouti, you're going to get a moment to respond to that. I just want to ask you first, let's just clear this up before you do respond to Colonel Kemp. Did you call Hamas our brave fighters or not?
I never said that, no. I don't know where you got that from.
Well,
no, it's not true. You are putting words in my mouth, but let me respond to what the colonel said. The colonel is reflecting clearly a very clear white supremacy approach. It is okay to kill Palestinian
white supremacy,
civilians.
Mr.
Why don't you say clearly that you are supporting the killing of Palestinian children? Why don't you say clearly that you are supporting the killing of Palestinian civilians? Why don't you say that you are supporting Israeli occupation of Palestinian land and supporting 3 terrible war crimes? Even the American public is against that. 3 war crimes. The war crime of genocide, which the International Court of Justice is looking into now. The war crime of collective punishment. And the war crime of ethnic cleansing. 90% of the Palestinian people were evicted from their homes. What would you have said if Palestinians evicted Israelis from their homes?
Well, they have done,
be
of course.
acceptable?
Mr. Barghouti, they have done,
Why
of course.
don't you use the same standard?
I'm going to go back to Colonel Kemp in a moment. But why is this white supremacy? Where did that come from? The Israeli public are not all white.
Because I think you don't see us white enough, and you are against anybody who's not white. And that's why you justify terrible atrocities that Israel is committing. And you are justifying not only the fact that Israel is occupying us, but the fact that Israel conducted the worst kind of ethnic cleansing in 1948, forcing 70% of the Palestinian people out of
I'm going to go back to Colonel Kemp.
These are the facts.
I'll just go back to Colonel Kemp quickly. Colonel Kemp, you said that Mr. Barghouti said our brave fighters were Hamas. He says he didn't say that. Who's right?
Well, I certainly read him quote. He may not have said it, but I read him being quoted as saying, I think it was Middle East Eye or something like that. But he can certainly, if he'd like to Google it to see what he actually said, he can find that on the internet.
And what do you make of this claim? And what do you make of this claim, Colonel Kemp, that everyone who justifies or is in any way on the side of Israel during this war is a white supremacist? Because Israel doesn't look like a very all-white country to me, but I don't know.
No, I mean, there are all blends of races in Israel. And one thing we should remember as well is that there is a significant Muslim Arab population in Israel. And one thing that I've observed in recent weeks is a skyrocketing of support for Israel among the Israeli Arab Muslim population. The polls, a number of polls have shown that a huge growth of support for Israel, a greater association with the State of Israel since the 7th of October. And that is partly due to the fact that Hamas, his brave fighters from Hamas, that he clearly supports, came in and butchered not just Israelis, but Israeli Jews, but they also came and killed a number of Arabs and people from many different ethnicities. So what he's talking about, I think it's a great throwaway line, white supremacy. It obviously gets, it's one of these intersectional terms, Me Too and all this sort of stuff. He obviously thinks that's going to garner support for him from people who, do rightly object to the idea of white supremacy. But I don't think that.
Mr. Barghouti.
They put them under siege. Practically, Israel has taken the 2.2 million people in Gaza as hostages, and they subject them to terrible humanitarian situation. And from year to year, they attack them by bombarding them with planes and by attacking them with tanks. The fact that people in Gaza are trying to defend themselves from the Israeli continuous aggression does not make them terrorists. It makes them freedom fighters. That is the reality.